everybody. Good afternoon once again, and thank you again for your time and joining us for this webinar. Today we're going to talk about the ultimate question. We're going to ask and try and answer whether one simple question can predict a member's future visit frequency. Just before we get started on that, we thought it might be useful to give you a very brief introduction to the Retention People for those of you who are not familiar with us or what we do. We are experts in membership retention, and we focus on providing customer experience solutions to the global health and fitness market. So we work with nearly 1,000 clubs worldwide now, mostly in the UK, but with a growing presence globally, working with multinational groups and with our channel partners overseas. Three key areas of our business are, first of all, research, which is where we get today's webinar from. So we focus on learning more about retention and learning how we can affect and influence clubs' retention. We then use that to drive the development of software-based solutions, and then we support that with consultancy and training. So today is the latest in our series of research pieces. Hopefully some of you have joined us before when we've been presenting our findings, but you can look at, usually every 3 months we'll be presenting a new piece of research, and today is the next in that series. So as we go through today's webinar, we're going to explain not only the answer to the question that's on the screen, but also focusing on knowing why knowing the answer to that question is so important. So it's worth spending a few moments just to consider why and how we got to do this research. So at TRP, our mission is to improve retention in the global health and fitness industry. That's our one focus, and everything we do is aimed at achieving that goal. So research plays a key part in that. As I've just said, it's one of the three key strands of our business. So over the years, there's been a growing body of research, and we've been pleased to play a very key part in developing this. So in 2001, we saw the FIA, so the trade industry in the UK, write the Winning the Retention Battle series. So working with one of our colleagues, Dr. Melvin Hilsden, who completed the research for us today. In fact, Melvin was involved right back in the earliest days getting the very successful Winning the Retention Battle series published. We then worked closely with Dr. Melvin Hilsden and the FIA again to present analysis of over 300,000 members in the Expert Guide to Retention and Nutrition in 2008. And now in 2012, we're looking forward to working again with Dr. Hilsden and with Dr. Paul Bedford in publishing the latest study, the biggest ever. We're hoping to have over 1 million member records in this study being published later on in 2012. Along the way with these major publications, we've also published and worked with clients to deliver numerous pieces of research focusing on how clubs can improve their retention. So lots of that work is focused on the benefit of interacting with members, delivering great service to those members. But we've also been able to show the benefit of both the quantity and quality of interactions as it relates to membership contracts, for example. So we were able to show that the quality and quantity of interactions played a bigger part in membership retention than a contract, something that was very powerful at the time. And we have plenty more work that's either been done on a private basis for individual clients or is yet to be published. For example, recently we've completed work showing the interplay between interactions with members when the interaction is from a fitness instructor compared to someone from the front of house team. We've also looked at emails. So if you've been on our website recently, you may have seen the story on whether emailing customers improves retention. We've spent a lot of time looking at the benefits and the impact of your sales team and how sales can impact on retention. Often retention is just seen as an after-sales event when we're trying to raise the priority of it during the sales process as well. And then most recently in 2011 and again in 2012, we've worked with LeisureNet to develop and deliver the national NPS survey for UK health and fitness, culminating in just 2 or 3 months ago with our What Makes Good Clubs Good and Bad Clubs Bad article and webinars that again some of you may well have joined us on. So the key takeaway from all this work is that we aim to create practical solutions that can be applied to your business to improve your service, members visit frequency, and ultimately retention. So these are not just theoretical pieces. We aim to have true practical solutions. So if we look at our customer lifeline now, starting on the left with customer acquisition, so when we take who we recruit, how we market and how we sell, through to the just joined category of people, how we manage their orientation or their new member journey, how we deal with members who are our raving fans, they're really self-motivated, how we deal with our struggling members, and ultimately how we deal with members when they leave. We're now in a situation where, based on the research we've done, we can add real value at each stage of that journey. So we can provide guidance, expertise, information through our research to help clubs target the demographics who are most likely to stay in the first place. We can help clubs put in place a member orientation that creates frequent early visits, frequent early interactions, and therefore improved length of stay. We've been able to harness the power of Net Promoter, which we're going to be talking about again today, excuse me, to really work with our raving fans and drive referrals and drive great success from our focus on exceptional service. And then our work with our struggling and leaving members, focusing on being able to identify who those members are before they know themselves. So again, the focus here on all of our research is to create solutions that can be implemented in clubs. And today we want to give you another action that you can deploy in your club to truly make a difference to the service your members receive and therefore how well you retain them. So as we've just demonstrated, we clearly have a very natural quest, a natural thirst to extend our knowledge about retention and the factors that impact on retention. But above and beyond that, there's two key reasons why we've carried out the research today. So when we look at our flat line from our medical graphic here, we can think of a typical membership as being a bit like this. We can see activity on the left, it goes up, it goes down, there is activity, there's interest, the members are visiting the clubs. But at some point we get to that flat line, and we know that from the average member that can take 2 to 3 months. So the gap from actually stopping attending to stopping paying can be as much as 2 to 3 months. So do we wait for our members to reach that point? Do we wait for if this was a medical situation, for the alarms to go off, for the medical staff to grab the crash carts, to come rushing in to try and sort out the emergency situation? Or do we try and identify what's going on before we reach that point and take action earlier? So again, not to take our medical analogy too far, of course all the medical staff, the doctors and nurses are trying to take care of the situation before that happens, so it's very much a prevention model, and the flat line and the alarm sounding is very much the last resort. So we definitely want to be in that same situation as well. Historically, lots of clubs have put lots of time and effort into trying to deal with members once they've reached this flat line point. And what we're going to be talking about today is how we can get even better at establishing that early warning system. Now the second principle, the second reason we're doing this research is Principle 7. This one comes from Frederick Reichheld himself. So this was the man who carried out the research and wrote the book that created Net Promoter Score in the first place. So in 2006, Frederick Reichheld published a book, The Ultimate Question, and he outlined some of the key principles that were very important whenever you were using Net Promoter Score. So we're very aware that Net Promoter Score is very widely used by lots of different organizations, but Net Promoter Score is actually a licensed product that should be used in a very specific way. As licensees, we understand this and try and ensure we stay true to the principles of using Net Promoter Score. So Principle 7 is that we always have to validate that scores link to behaviors. So although there's lots of evidence to support the facts that high NPS drives loyalty and drives referrals and therefore drives income, there always needs to be a check that NPS is working in any given industry, organization, or when it's deployed in a particular way. So there's actually lots of reasons that scores may not be linked to the results businesses actually need. So my colleague had a very first-hand experience of this. He took his car in to be serviced, and after the car was serviced, the person who was dealing with taking the payment had to ask my colleague the Net Promoter question. He actually said he would be sent the Net Promoter question via email. That seems fair and legitimate and great that the company was interested in understanding the level of service. Where it fell down was that the person who was dealing with my colleague then stressed that it would be really, really good if he could give a score of a 9 or a 10 because this chap's bonus depended on it. So it's not uncommon at all to see the process being misled or biased or corrupted in some way. In fact, Reichert himself quotes an example of a car manufacturer who paid incentives for NPS and saw the score increase but saw the number of repurchases by their customers decline. In other words, the score wasn't matching the behavior, and although Reichert doesn't quote which car company it was, I do wonder if it was the same car company that my colleague had that experience with. So the message here is we can't assume it works, we always need to check. So let's look again a little bit more in detail at our flat line. It's very clear that visits form the early part of any member experience, and that's then followed by that period of non-visiting, and ultimately to cancellation. So if we start to understand the visits, then we can start to understand the early warning. So we can identify what's going on with people's visit frequency, we can understand when it's up and when it's down, whether it's declining, and we can use that to predict when they're going to start getting near that real danger zone of no visits. Now we've already done lots of work. Those of you who are familiar with some of our other research will be familiar with our risk of dropout algorithm that takes not just visit frequency but a whole bunch of other factors and has built a very sophisticated algorithm to identify which members are at risk of quitting. As we see with the dotted line though, as soon as the visits stop and we're in that danger zone, then we're rapidly running out of time towards cancellation. So every day that goes past without another visit is a day where it gets harder to get that member to come back. So that's the real danger zone. And traditionally those operators who have waited for members to get into that danger zone or more have rested on their laurels thinking that members who don't turn up but pay are actually really good members are those that are really now struggling to keep those members and keep their membership base high. So waiting until members get past that dotted line is a very high risk strategy. The more we can work on the left of that dotted line, the better we'll be. So we're looking for as much early warning as possible. The nearer we get to that left-hand side, the more information we have there, the better. So the research we're talking about today helps us to look at where NPS fits in this journey. So with that in mind, and with all of that really just setting the scene, let's talk a little bit about what we actually did. So we surveyed nearly 18,000 members by email. We know for definite that over 16,000 of them received the email, and then we had a response rate which resulted in nearly 3,000, over 2,500 members responding and completing the survey. So the survey was very simple. It said, the email said, would you like to complete a very short survey? The member would click on that, be taken to a website, and they'd be asked the NPS question, and then they'd be asked a follow-up question, which is why. So just to make sure everybody's familiar with what we're talking about, the NPS question is how likely is it that you would refer our company, so the retention people for example, to a friend or colleague. A scoring system from 0, which is not at all likely, to 10, which is extremely likely. Responses are then classified into 3 groups. We have our detractors in red who score 6 or below, our passives or fence sitters in yellow, 7s and 8s, and our promoters in green who are 9s and 10s. So our 9s and 10s become our sales force. They're the people who sit in the pub telling their friends that they should go and join the members, that person's club. And then we have our detractors who sit in the same conversation and say, oh, definitely not, you don't want to join there, you want to go somewhere else or not bother at all. So typically we'd calculate a net promoter score, so that would be for an organization where we'd subtract the percentage of detractors from the percentage of promoters. But in this case we're looking at individual scores, and therefore we're looking at these three classifications, but particularly the extremes, the detractors and the promoters. It's very important whenever we're looking at our results that we follow robust scientific methods. So we don't need to go into these in great detail, but we want to reassure you that when we're working with a professor of public health, as we do with Dr. Hilsden, then we ensure that the data is always treated with real integrity. So one of the things we want to make sure is that there isn't bias in the data that might lead us to make false conclusions. So the first area we looked at was in the gender of those responding. So we looked at the responses of between females and males, and we wanted to see whether there was anything that predicted a response based on gender. So is there a significant difference between these two columns? And we're able to say in this case that there is no difference. So there's no difference in the NPS scores as a result of either men or women answering the question. We also, though, looked at the age of people responding. And again, all you're looking at here to just get an intuitive feel of whether there's a difference. It's just to look at how big the different sections are. So how big the green on the right-hand side for the 45 pluses compared to how big the green section is on the left-hand side for the younger members. And what we found was very clearly that older members are more likely to be promoters and less likely to be detractors. And you can see that clearly, but the statistical tests also back that up to show that those older members are naturally more likely to give you higher scores. So that leads us to be very cautious when we make conclusions about NPS, because if we're trying to compare clubs, if one club simply has an older demographic, that club might score higher with their NPS than another with a younger demographic for no other reason than just they have older members. We also hypothesized that a clear difference may come out from how long the person had been a member before they filled out the survey. And again, we're looking here to see if there's any significant difference between the categories, and Melvin's statistical tests were able to confirm that there isn't a significant difference between those categories. And then finally we looked at the effect that visits had. So we wanted to look at the average visits in the 12 weeks prior to the survey and see whether there was a bias towards an particular NPS score. This was where we found the most useful and the most interesting finding. You can see that there is a significant association, but it's not exactly as you'd predict. I would draw your attention to the second category, which is those members basically visiting a little bit. It's anywhere between 2.1 visits a month and 4 visits a month. What we can see in this group is actually that they're less likely to be promoters, they're more likely to be detractors, but they're actually less likely to be a promoter than someone who comes even less. So what this appears to be showing, this peak of discontent, if you like, is that those members who are trying to engage with the club, trying to exercise a little bit, are the ones who are most likely to be detractors and least likely to be promoters. People who are coming in barely at all, they've pretty much given up on it. They've kind of resigned themselves to the fact that that's the kind of member they are, and they actually they're more likely to be a promoter. So it's kind of counterintuitive. But then what we definitely see is towards the right-hand side of the screen, those people who attend more are much more likely to be promoters. So once again, it looks at that visit frequency of once a week or more being really, really critical. If you're way off achieving once a week, it seems to be less of a deal. But if you're borderline and you're kind of just close to achieving once a week, then you're most vulnerable and you're the person who needs most of our attention. So just to pause for a moment for an interim summary before we finish with the main conclusions. The interim summary really shows two things. First of all, we need to make sure that we draw conclusions with real care. When we're trying to make comparisons between clubs, we're making comparisons between data sets, it's really important that we bear in mind that some of the source of that data may actually lead to differences rather than genuine differences in service. So if we're looking at an older demographic, we may naturally get a higher score even when the difference in loyalty is not actually present. What that reiterates is we need to make sure that we ask the NPS question in the same way, using the same format at all times, and take some account of the demographics that are in play. So anytime NPS is being deployed, it should always be used and questioned in exactly the same way. The second key point to make was that therefore, as a result of this, we had to make sure that we controlled for these factors for the remainder of the study. We had to make sure that we weren't just reporting a difference that was based on some demographic profiling, and that's exactly what we did. So using this kind of statistical analysis that allows us to take these factors into account, we were able to get through to the most important findings of the research. And that was this. So having control for those factors, made sure that we're not making assumptions based on age or gender or visit frequency. We were able to look at the attendance of members in the 12 weeks after they were surveyed and relate that back to their classification on NPS. And you can see we get a very strong and very distinct pattern. So if somebody answers the NPS survey as a detractor today, they're significantly less likely to attend frequently over the next 12 weeks when compared to either a passive or a promoter. So flip that round on its head, we're now seeing that if we can have a promoter in the club today, then over the next 12 weeks, then they're going to visit the club much more. That means they're going to be getting much more value, they're more likely to refer friends, they're more likely to make secondary spend, and therefore they're more likely to remain as a member, so we're going to retain their business. So this is really, really powerful stuff. What we're actually looking at now is a very early warning system that we'll expand on in just a minute. And it's really important to stress, again, that this is controlling for those other variables. So regardless of how much the member was visiting before they took the survey, this finding will apply in the 12 weeks after they take the survey. So let's have a look at our early warning system again. So we talked about previously how our risk of dropout and analysing members' visit patterns early in their membership gave us an early warning system before they then reach that flatline point where there's no visits, and then that rapid fall towards cancellations when people have broken their habits, they're not getting any value, they're not using the club anymore, and they head towards that cancellation where it's too late to save them. What we can now start to do is look at how NPS fits into that early warning system. And the best way for me to express this is to think of it as almost a pre-warning. We know that if we have detractors in our business, then shortly after the time they let us know they're a detractor, their visit frequency is going to drop. That means that they're much closer to getting to that no visits point and then dropping off into cancellation. Whereas if we increase the number of promoters we have, those people are going to then be visiting more, we're going to keep our visits high, and they're going to be much further away from getting into that danger zone. So we're actually looking at something that's incredibly powerful as that pre-warning, something that if we drive NPS in our business, create lots and lots of promoters, we can rest assured that more and more of our members are further away from cancelling. So once again, when we said at the start we were looking to give you a practical outcome that you could be looking at in your business, then tracking and monitoring the number of promoters you have and driving up the number of promoters you have is a clear way to go. So how do we do this? 4 recommendations. Number 1, measure NPS. It's a very, very powerful tool established globally with multinational businesses for driving loyalty, driving referrals, and improving retention. With this evidence, we can now see how well it can also apply to the health and fitness sector. We can use it as a pre-warning system. So the NPS scores you're getting will predict the visit patterns of members, which in turn determine their retention. So it's very obvious, it's very intuitive to know that members who are visiting more are much less likely to cancel. If we can identify those members earlier, then we can predict who's going to fall into that danger zone. We can use NPS to create raving fans. They're our promoters. They're our 9s and 10s. The more promoters we have, that means the more regular visitors we have, which means the better the retention. If we have problems with capacity and workload and wear and tear, then they're good problems to have because it means we've got loyal customers who are paying us money to solve those problems. And then finally, we can identify who those detractors are, and we can employ the technique that Frederick Reichelt talks about, closing the loop. So if we look just at the graphic that we've put on the screen, this would be a list of detractors. So we can see at the top, Bethan Palmer has replied to our survey a few days ago. She's a detractor. We can see her name, her phone number, we can see her photo, so it might jog our memory that we've seen her in the club. And then we can call Bethan to understand what her problems are, try and put them right, try and alleviate the impact that those problems are having, and try to turn Bethan into a promoter. So this is a system that we've developed to really turn NPS into a powerful force for closing the loop. That allows us to track the responses that we've had, track how well detractors are being spoken with and interacted with, and then ultimately track whether we've managed to turn that person from a detractor into a promoter. So based on that research, they're the 4 things that we'd recommend. Making sure that NPS is part of a health and fitness business. It's part of your early warning system, that you drive your service levels. Your whole belief and your philosophy is about creating raving fans, and then where people fall out of that, and they are your detractors, you work closely, you monitor them, you know who they are, you identify them, and then you close the loop, by which we mean turning them into promoters. So we hope you've enjoyed listening to those findings and a little bit more context and a little bit more of the background to why we did the research. If you haven't yet read the research, you can visit our website at theretentionpeople.com, and the full study is on there for you to be able to read and look at in a little bit more detail. But what I'd like to do just to finish with is give you the opportunity to ask any questions, make any comments, or offer any feedback that you have. You can do that by typing into the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and if you type your questions in, then we'll read them out and we'll do our best to answer them. So we'll just take a few moments just to see if anybody has any questions. Okay, it looks like we may have answered all your questions already. So what I'll do, I'll just finish by putting our contact details up on the screen. If you'd like to call or email us, then you can contact me as per the contact details on the screen. If you'd like to go online and read the article yourself, theretentionpeople.com. We'd obviously love to hear any comments or any feedback you have. But if there are no further questions, I suggest that you will log off from the webinar, and we will stop the webinar as soon as everybody has left. So just to finish with, thank you again very much for your time for joining us. Hope it's been a useful presentation, and please don't hesitate to get in touch if you'd like any more information.